Welcome to Business Model Hackers. This is the podcast where we unravel the complexities of business strategies and management tools, led by Schreim. See, we have a former top-tier management consultant who decided to trade that all away and it was a lucrative career for the dynamic world of entrepreneurship, and this podcast you're listening to is exactly part of that journey. So welcome to the show. And you should know, Sam himself has consulted everyone from Fortune 500 executives to ambitious startups, and even shared his experience and expertise with governments, nonprofits, in strategic and management roles. Gear up. We're about to get into it. Sam, how you doing today, man?
Good. Philip, how are you today?
I'm doing amazing. So this is a very unique opportunity with this episode here to give people a better understanding of what this show is really about. And it's the foundation of the show has a lot to do with heuristics, right? Rules of thumb, as you've coined them. And so I'd love it if you could start by explaining what heuristics are and how they function as mental shortcuts in the decision-making process.
Yeah, I mean, the term rule of thumb isn't, I didn't coin that term, right? I mean, that's, a lot of people use it. I mean, heuristics, if you think about it, are cognitive rules of thumb, right? They are, in a sense, mental shortcuts that allow us to make quick judgment and decisions, especially in complex situations with incomplete information. The main purpose of rules of thumb is that they serve as an efficient approximation rather than like a strictly logical process. They work by simplifying, selectively focusing attention on a limited set of factors relative to the specific bias being leveraged. This allows a faster assessment of things. The trade-off is, as a result of that, you can ignore relevant information and you can potentially introduce errors or distortion to your answer. However, I think heuristics are often quite useful overall, not only useful, but they're necessary. Despite deviation from the formal rationality, they exploit pattern recognition capabilities. Humans, if you leverage them efficiently, they can guide reasonable real-world decision makers and can lead to plausible conclusions quickly using limited data and limited mental resources. They also provide an adaptation to help navigate complex uncertainties.
Yeah, and this is going to be, I think, important, like in terms of business strategy and management and heuristics in the context of startups and entrepreneurships. I love what you're saying about being able to make decisions with limited amount of data or time. So how, in your experience, has the idea of heuristics and rule of thumbs played a role in business strategy and management for startups and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, there are good and bad heuristics applications, right? Every episode we do on this program is we try to bring our business model hackers community closer to improve their decision-making under uncertainty, right? In a startup environment, uncertainty is high and data is limited. Heuristics serves more or less as a practical decision-making tool. Entrepreneurs often rely on heuristics or intuition, heuristic principles to make quick but reasonably informed decisions. For example, one of my very go-to heuristic or rule of thumbs that I use a lot are the 80-20 rule. And that is, the rule to rule them all if you want. It can be a very valuable tool, for example, for prioritizing tasks or resources, right? When you focus on the 20% of effort. So to yield the 80% of the results only from 20% of effort, imagine the power of that. I think overall, heuristics in startups and entrepreneurships are less about like rigid formulas. It's more about flexible, experience-based guidelines that drives efficient decision-making, the risk management, and strategic planning. In a landscape where speed is of the essence, right? Speed, adaptability, practicality are of the essence.
Yeah. And when you're moving at that pace, you're bound to run into some cognitive bias. So I'd really love to talk about the challenges of heuristics and cognitive bias in decision-making. Like, how can leaders apply these heuristics and decision-making effectively, minimizing the amount of cognitive bias they may be exposed to in that process?
Yeah, I mean, to know more about cognitive biases, I think, one of my favorite books is Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm sure you've heard that, about that book, or maybe you read it. I read it several times. Every now and then I read it. because you can't actually, it's such a long book and it has so much information. If you want to retain this, it's better to read it a few times, just to keep reminding myself and keep practicing these biases that people have. I mean, there are hundreds of biases. We can't get into all of them, but I think some of the important ones that we can touch on in this one is, first of all, I think let's look at how Kahneman simplifies the concept and how he explains how the mind works, right? He basically boils it down into the two systems that he refers to as system 1 and system 2. The first person to come up with a two kind of brains theory was actually an American philosopher. In his 1890 textbook, The Principle of Psychology, that was, back when psychology wasn't as sexy, or behavioral economics and behavioral science wasn't as sexy back then. So he talks about the studied subconscious, how the studied subconscious influences selective attention, and how the minds operate on fringe consciousness in a way supporting the dual process thinking. The same interpretation of Kahneman, who later popularized it, obviously, in his book, right? So now everybody knows about system 1 and system 2. Kahneman went on to win the Nobel Prize for his game-changing finding called the prospect theory. If you don't know prospect theory, it's a very simple concept. Actually, he proved that it's proved like the loss aversion in humans, right? What that basically is, and what's interesting about that is that his experiments not only showed that people are loss averse, but it also showed by exactly how much. In fact, it turns out that people are twice as afraid to lose than to gain. That means we tend to focus mainly on small gains and take less risks in life and in business and everything. For example, if you're a business and you're looking to invest in long-term or less certain ventures and ones that could be highly rewarding, you would be loss averse. So you'd rather invest in small gains. So instead of introducing a new product to a market or conducting like what we preach here, which is business model hacks, you rather work on small increments on existing products because that's safer. What that leads to is small gains. But then the risk is far greater because these small things or changes that you make eventually can lead to nothing if you're losing market share, versus a new product that could be replacing, or an options that could be replacing those loss in sales that you're getting from your old products. The other thing I think about prospect theory that is interesting is that humans, they tend to be afraid of new ideas, right? The same thing, every time you're confronted with new information, you go into the fight or flight mode and you turn it off completely. The reason for that is basically, as humans, when we encounter new information, it's almost like a threat. In the past, obviously, in the past, people didn't deal with new information. They dealt with animals, trying to attack. And now, new information that's difficult to process is immediately default to the system that's more complex in your brain that Kahneman refers to as a lazy part of your brain. Just think about it this way. If I asked you, like, in your mind, calculate 2 by 2, right? Anybody can answer that, if you've memorized your multiplied tables. But if I asked you now, like, what is 14 times 17? Unless you've memorized that, you are going to have to do some computation. Now it becomes difficult. You'd rather pick up your calculator and do it. So the idea is that we should not really always turn off new information. We need to be aware of the BS. And Nassim Taleb's in his book, Anti-Fragile and Fooled by Randomness, talks about that in very detail. He talks about how basically we as humans tend to invest. He gives the examples because his experience is mainly with traders and in the stock market, and all these big things on the stock market are related to going through these, showing small gains by betting on the market, but also taking big risks with these small gains that they're getting without really them knowing, because the big risks are basically those black swan events that happen in the market. By doing that and not having a balance curve where you have actually, high risk, high reward, small bets on high risk, high reward elements in your portfolio, you can actually offset for those big events. So this is something that prospect theory in of itself is one of the things that's modeled in a similar shape. The curve is modeled in a similar way that you can also take that into strategic planning or innovation in companies. And you see why companies that have investing in their dying business model as opposed to investing in something bigger, yes, it's small investments, but they didn't yield any results. It was doomed to failure due to the fear of having, those options and those experiments and betting on those in the long term so that they offset the loss of business that they have. And so they perish.
This is heavy stuff, man, especially with the emerging technologies like AI coming in place right now. anyone who made small bets on small gains just to focus on the bottom line, which anyone who's ever been in marketing knows that when you have a client, they just want to know like the next week, what's changed, right? Every week, I want to know the data, where you can't look at it like that in all instances. There are some things that are more important in business that require that different thinking. And I love that you dived into that, because if people aren't listening to the implications of what you just said, I mean, they really need to go back and just review that, because this is going to be super important for anyone who's looking to be in the game long term. And as we know, business is the one game you can be in for years to come. So with that said, I'd love to go further into this future thinking and sort of talk about how you see the role of heuristics evolving in the future of business decision making and for leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is maybe AI may be helpful in calling off the BS, do computations beyond rule of thumbs, that can help overall. I think the AI can help, or when you want to validate your rule of thumb. But there's only one problem, right? We have something called AI hallucination to deal with. I'm not sure if you're familiar with hallucination, but AI models make high confidence false predictions the same way human judgments deviate from rationality, right? I see that as an area of development and utmost important, because the last thing you want is to augment these biases with hallucinations. Right? Think about how disastrous that could be. If you don't know what hallucination is like when the AI is forced to answer. I mean, the way the AI models have been trained, they call these, auto distribution errors. This happens when the question you ask differs significantly from the training data or the available data that the machine language model have, or so they make judgments that, go haywire, or they come up with overconfident predictions. Models, hallucinates with 85% certainty around images, that's been proven. If an image they haven't seen before or they haven't trained on, they got an 85% certainty. They hallucinate with 85% certainty. That's pretty bad, I think, if you think about, in the context of things that they don't know. Essentially, most AI today has no intrinsic intelligence, and their pseudo-reasoning fails unpredictably, unlike humans' perceptions. Identifying and correcting these algorithmic hallucinations, I think, is the challenge. And I think that's the future trend, because if you fix that, you can definitely help humans overcome their biases. By sometimes relying, or I don't want to say fully relying, but augmenting their decision-making by leveraging AI capabilities that are super accessible. Later on, maybe through AR glasses or whatnot, it could be super accessible. So this could be also through the use of the models, or the hardware could be in the cloud, or it could be edge computing, or even, with the optimization of these LLMs, be even done locally. You don't even have to be connected to the internet without super computing powers. So I'm not talking about quantum computing here, right? This is way out in the future, but I think we are getting closer to, and all of the research right now is going into reducing that hallucination. And I think that is ultimately going to improve decision-making overall and improve heuristics, if you want, or quick decision-making, and the rule of thumbs, make it more, let's say, accurate or less prone to errors.
That's actually one of the main reasons I love this show and what you're doing with it, Sam, is a lot of the way I used to live my life just in general has always been in relation to like, what framework can I apply here? Just what fundamentals can I look at that do like 80% of the work in any given situation? It really is an exciting time to then consider the fact that if we can solve this hallucination concern in terms of future trends and emerging technologies, how we leverage heuristics and things of that nature moving forward, it's only going to improve the speed and the velocity of our capability to build, to create, and unlock value in the whatever market we're in. So I'm really stoked about that. And now I'm curious, do you have any personal experiences that maybe an application with a heuristic that sort of significantly improved or influenced your own business decision-making?
Yeah, I mean, interesting you asked that, because there is no, one size fits all. Right? You need to have the knowledge of all, as many tools as possible that are available to you, as many rules of thumb as possible that you can collect, because each one applies to different things. And I think putting these in my books, right? I'm writing a book titled Cognitive Toolset that contains 370 rules of thumb and frameworks and thinking models that allow you to kind of apply them in almost any situation or any problem you face. Also, I wrote that book because I kind of put all of these, started summarizing, putting them in Excel spreadsheet initially, then I start expanding on them, and I refer to them every now and then, and I have like a database where it allows me to look into, for that situation, what can I look up, just to keep those fresh in my mind. I think the one rule to rule them all by far is the 80-20 rule. It applies to 80% of the situations. But if you want, I can list a few rules. We don't have time to explain all of them, but I think the rule of minimalism, like less is more, that's one of the rules. Then you have also triangulation or critical thinking. Triangulation is when you're trying to look at the same answer from different perspectives, just to make sure that you look at it from 3 dimensions, and then you kind of hone in on the answer. You make sure that you cross-check it like 3 times from different angles. Fermi thinking, which is an approximation that's used by consultants just to kind of estimate. If you have kind of an answer that's broad, you can apply the Fermi thinking method to make sure that number is within, a certain range that's not above or below what it's supposed to be. The other one is about asking the right questions, then before you jump into a solution to a problem, make sure you ask the right questions. When you're faced with a problem, make sure you identify the root cause of the problem as opposed to jumping immediately to solving the problem. You get the linearity versus non-linearity that allows you to kind of distinguish between a system or a complex system problem versus a linear system problem. That same applies also for distributions, whether you're looking at a Gaussian normal distribution or you're looking at a power law situation. I think those kind of the summaries, those are the ones that I use the most. Like I said, there is no one size fits all. You need to know as many as possible. My book is coming up 3 months from now. I hope this will I think it's the only book out there that will cover all of these different thinking models and all of these rule of thumb under, one handbook.
I mean, that's going to be an exciting book for sure, because it's right in line with the way I try to think myself and save myself the trouble of having to always reinvent the wheel with any time I'm faced with a problem. So that's what I love most about what you're sharing here with heuristics and rule of thumb. Are there any key takeaways you can share with us as we begin to close things out so that the business model hackers who are listening can walk away with a summary, some key takeaways?
Yeah, I think I'm going to reiterate what I just said. It's very important, and I think it's worth the 80-20 is one of the rules to rule them all. But again, there's no one size fits all, right? You need to have kind of a Swiss Army knife of tools. So you're faced with a situation, you pull your Swiss Army knife. Which tool applies here best? If you're under pressure and you're trying to solve something, have a tool ready. And if you don't, make sure you educate yourself on these tools and know as many tools as possible. Now, I think the other thing is about having AI in place. You may also seek advice from the AI, and it's accessible on your iPhone through an app. Again, you need to watch for hallucination. Never assume the answers that the AI gives you is 100%, but it gives you guidance. It may even give you the rule of thumb that you can apply for that particular situation. You can apply yourself. So you may ask it to give you a rule of thumb as opposed to ask it for an answer. If you want from an application standpoint, the other thing that I also want to close with is you need to be aware of cognitive biases. I think I would recommend anybody gets the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And if you want to get deeper into the subject, you can also go and get Fooled by Randomness. It's a little bit more technical. If you want to be less technical, you get the Anti-Fragile, or actually the entire Incerto series from Nassim Nicholas Taleb is a very good series of books to read and improve your way of thinking to avoid falling for cognitive biases.
Well, I honestly think that's going to wrap up the discussion for today. I learned a lot myself, and I can't thank the business model hackers enough for tuning in. And I do hope that you recall, as we always do when we close things out, that businessmodelhackers.com does exist as a resource for you. Whenever you've heard something here, you know that we go far deeper in it when you signed up to the website newsletter, and we start sending you some in-depth analysis of these exact things that we've discussed here. I can't thank you enough for stopping by. Please follow our socials. We're going to be active on them, and we're here for you. With that said, Sam has just been generous and broke it all down for us, and I honestly can't wait for the next episode. Thanks for stopping by.